All right, let's get on to part 2 and part 3 of our show tonight. It's an honor to have our guest in studio. We don't get that much because so many times it's all by phone. But our guest tonight is Renee Lindsey. Renee is an intuitive who developed her skills as a professional medium upon moving to Utah in 2009. Serving both Mormon and non-Mormon clients, Renee offers her wisdom, zest, and gentleness developed through her life's experiences, including transitioning from U.S. military to civilian life, healing from emotional and childhood sex abuse, finding clarity in the midst of crisis of faith, single parenting with grace, and rebuilding a joyful life after divorce. Drawing inspiration from the work of astro greats such as Linda Goodman and Liz Green, as well as augmenting astrology with tarot imagery, Renee grounds her metaphysical perspective through both lived experiences and formal training in philosophy from Utah Valley University. Renee, thank you so much for coming up here on a cold, stormy night. Well, it's not stormy, but a cold, rainy night in October to come to the studio.
Thank you for having me.
Why don't you give us a little bit of your backstory, if that's okay, a little bit of your history of course, we just scratched the surface, but a little bit of your life that brought you to where you are today.
Certainly. Well, I was born and raised in the culture of the military. I was an Army daughter, and then I was an Army and a Navy wife.
Is that mic turned on?
I can't.
I'm not seeing any movement. Hold on.
Mic check. Is it on? Can people hear me?
I think so. You want it? Yeah, it should be on. Hello. Let's see. Go ahead.
Okay. And so...
There we go.
And also, the culture of the military, it has... The value system is all-encompassing. And so I grew up with this reality that was very much tied to life and death, and adopted that until I was out of the military in 2009. And so about 28 years of my life had that mindset that was really fixed. I was also born and raised Mormon and transitioned out of the church around 2012 or so. What's interesting about living in Utah is that I see the cultural aspect of Mormonism as well as the religious aspect, and draw parallels in living within a value system that's very strong. My transition from the military tends to mirror people's transition from Mormon religion when it's very embedded in culture also. I didn't actually have much difficulty transitioning out of Mormonism, but I did have that difficulty re-entering, or I should say entering for the first time, civilian life. When it comes to being sensitive, being a medium, I'd have to say that is not something that I even admitted to myself until just a few years ago. I had a few experiences as a child. Sometimes I would see visions of figures around, or I would have intuitions, but that tended to go away when I was in my teens. Up until about age 27, I was on a lot of medication, and I think that had an effect. So when I just worked with my doctor and got off of medication, then I started really having a lot of visions, a lot of premonitions. Premonition perhaps is not quite the word. My visions tend to be around character of people and not necessarily future events. So that started happening when I moved to Utah. It's been a pretty roller coaster ride. Even then, I had a couple of years of, it was just that one time, over and over and over, until finally I thought, I don't think this is, how many one-time experiences can you have before you finally, okay, this is just part of who I am. As far as becoming a professional medium, that was not something I even considered until I was about a year and a half into my study in philosophy, because it didn't sit well with me to think that premonition or intuition could be the only way to look at my life. I didn't actually view it that way. I didn't think of it that way. And I think as a natural intuitive, but also a natural critical thinker, I felt a pull one way or the other, but I had really a lot of difficulty reconciling that. When I took a class at UVU on something called phenomenology, that is a study of experience, of somebody's experience of their reality. And it could be, it allowed for different perspectives to exist So I have an experience of a situation and somebody else is in that situation and their experience is entirely different, but they don't have to be one or the other. They can both be true and contradictory at the same time. Additionally, somebody's entire history is in their interpretation of the experience, as well as mine, and having this ability to have different perspectives simultaneously coexist was what allowed me to feel comfortable being a professional medium, because I didn't feel pigeonholed into telling somebody, this is who you are, this is what you should do, and not allow for their perspective. Additionally, and probably most importantly, I learned how to be wrong. And that I think is really important as a medium, because my interpretation of somebody's energy and their life comes through the lens of my own experience, which means I'm not fully inside of them, and I can't capture them entirely isolated. Mm-hmm. I'm part of that exchange. And so that's part of the, I guess a little bit of the history. I was married for 8 years. Then when my husband and I divorced, that was when I was out of the military life. I'm a single parent. I have 2 children. And the way that my critical thinking before I formally trained in philosophy came from trying to make sense of how to adjust from one mindset to another, because the way to handle conflict or any kind of disagreement in the military is very different from, Utah. It's
Right.
just a different approach entirely. And so the phrase, once a Marine, always a Marine,
Mm-hmm.
stuck in my mind quite a bit, but I thought, but there's no war here. I kept trying to find the war. And my relationships kept disintegrating because I couldn't figure out what the problem was until I really just went down and questioned my beliefs big time and figured out how to adjust and grow into and make peace with an environment that seemed very foreign to me.
Well, I would assume that having the military background that you've had and living it, a lot of people in the military that I know, it's either yes or no, it's black or white, it's on or off, and there's nothing in between there. And some of these, I don't want to call them subjects, but experiences in life that we have, obviously get really stifled with that type of mentality. Don't question. It's either yes or no. Do this or do that. And we'll do the thinking. You do what we tell you to do. That's got to be that has got to be very hard to transition out of. You probably flow back into that, and I would say that most people like yourself that have gone through that much training and that much experience, maybe it's changed for you now, but when your anger levels get elevated or things don't go right, I could see a person falling right back into that again, maybe not intentionally, but just instinctively.
Oh, sure. The most important driving factor, I think, for the roots of that military mindset are that it's not just black or white, it's also life or death. Mm-hmm. People are dying. It's a reality. It's true. I've been around death and impending death, my whole life. And so if it isn't that somebody is actually killed in war or killing in war, it's that we're planning for it. And so the survival instinct is very real, and the reaction is very real. And so then the instinct that comes up is related to physical safety, right, or a sense of physical safety. And so, retraining my brain starting from my amygdala was an extremely harrowing process. It was very difficult. I would say to parallel that with many experiences I've had with clients here in Utah, it's not necessarily life or death that's heaven or hell, but it is just as much investment mm-hmm. in that. The panic is still real. A sense of wanting to do right, of course, is very real. Mm-hmm. So my ethics then expanded when I was breaking through that, but it was a very uncomfortable process, thinking that a different way of behavior was still right and honorable. And these, a sense of virtue and valor and honor and right living is very much tied to, we're in a war here, and so let's stay alive. If we're not in a war now, we will be. This is what we trained for, things like that. One of the benefits of growing up in that culture, which I feel like I have kept, is to remain calm in crisis. I tend to slip back into being the calm one to steady. lots of times I've wondered, is it just personality, or is it, as my training? And this is the nature versus nurture argument. I think it's probably both. But there are some things in social situations that still set me off. This past weekend, I was just corresponding with one of my professors, and there was just where are the lines of propriety, which are really important to me and also tied to life and death before I can go back and rethink, so coming across as intense tends to happen sometimes. I'm practicing.
Do you think, and I'm going to tread lightly when I ask you this question, the military, when people are in the military, especially, all forms, but I mean especially people that are in other countries that are experiencing the things that you experience, they're seeing life and death. Sometimes they're in a situation where they're called to take somebody's life. I mean, to me, I can't even imagine that. I know I have a lot of friends that are police officers in big cities, and the things that they go through, but nothing at the degree people like yourself have. Do you ever get the sense that the military sometimes, I'll use this word carefully, but almost has to brainwash some people, if you will? Maybe that's not the right word, but maybe condition them so strongly that they forget about all this stuff out here on the edges and they just keep focused. I mean, that's...
So would you like me to tread lightly with my answer?
Sure. No, you can be honest. That's fine.
I have a very different view of the military than I used to. Now, when I think about it, the word brainwashing comes to mind. Conditioning, certainly, in order to govern large amounts of groups and be able to depend on an action without thought. And there are really great benefits to that. For example, if somebody's choking, we don't have to stop and assess the situation to see what the proper action is. We can just perform the Heimlich maneuver or whatever is appropriate for the time. So the appropriateness of it there is some appropriateness of it. To the extent with which soldiers and their families are educated into this paradigm, I think is imbalanced. But I also think is advantageous for the agenda of being able to do whatever the military wants to do. So as somebody who was in it, my perspective was it's the good guys versus the bad guys, and you do what you have to do in order to win, because there is this intrinsic conflict always happening. And the more you can stay with the orders, the more ethical a person you are, the greater your honor and things like that. So I would call it an imbalance for sure, but it is not so easy to step out of that and feel comfortable in a varied world, I would say. So stepping out of a really clear black-white dichotomy, then things become gray and uncertain. And so I would say that we as people probably tend to have a natural impulse to behave in a way in which we feel safe. So I happen to feel safe growing up in that environment. It's what I knew. And coming out of it, I remember I was actually really irritated that nobody gave me a handbook of how to behave when I was in Utah, because there really are handbooks of who you can talk to, what to wear, what to say, who you can't talk to. I mean, just daily social functions. And I was really angry at the military or even my current environment. Nobody gave me this book, and what was I supposed to do? Because if I didn't do it right, somebody was going to die, or I was going to cause harm, or there was this association with it that... later on, I did some thinking and really did a lot of research and found that I had some post-traumatic stress from that environment and was really responding in a way that was, there was, I don't want to use the word fantasy. There was a certainty in my mind that a situation was one particular way, which was mine, but that didn't allow for anything else. And so the transitioning, and it has been a years-long transition, and I think it will continue to go that way, into what I would call quote-unquote uncertainty, has been, very uncomfortable, because I'm dealing with primal triggers, bodily sensations, the fight or flight or freeze response, and things like that. I would say, yeah, we can use the word brainwash, but my study in philosophy, one of the thinkers that I've studied, his name is Michel Foucault, and he writes about power and control as not something that you can point a finger to, like a person, but more like when we say things like, oh, the government did this. Well, who is that?
Right.
It's a system, so that was very helpful in helping me make sense of this, because I kept trying to find some figure that I can pinpoint, and it wasn't working. It was too fluid. Like every time I thought I'd get my finger on it, then it would slip away, because it was not a single person that I could really say, this is the person and they had this agenda. It was more this system of control that had a particular agenda and it was going really well, but I wanted to extricate myself from that, because the once a Marine, always a Marine was wreaking havoc on my civilian life. And so that's where I came to the conclusion that there was much deeper control, or maybe the wrong place to look for it as I was moving out of that.
Do you think, Renee, that some of that control that's put there as you go through your training, as you go through your experiences, as you're in the military? I mean, some of these. What first of all, my hat's off to you for you serving in the military. And when I see these people on TV and different programs, these soldiers that I mean, they're crippled from the waist down. They're horrific physical things have happened to them, and how most of them are very accepting of it. I know that I think the average individual, non-military person, if he or she lost an arm or a leg, I mean, we would just be, oh my God, how can you deal with this? And some of these people are just, physically destroyed. It destroys emotionally and physically destroys the family, but yet they're still smiling and they're still going, and it's like that Terminator that just never gives up. That's got to be I guess maybe a gift, maybe a curse, or something that is really deeply. I don't like using that word brainwashing, because that's not the right word. Because when I say brainwashing, that means a weakness on somebody's part, but that's just got to be that intense training that just does not stop. That there is, there's no right, there's no left, it's just, this is what you got to do. And I there's a lot to comprehend there. That's got to be tough.
Yeah, I think there are a couple of ways to look at it. First of all, the word brainwashing, well, we can talk about an external system that has then been internalized. So somebody tells me what to do and they teach me how to follow orders, and then I start producing my own I'm going to follow orders, and I don't have to be told by somebody else all the time how to do that. What to do is different, but how to behave, then it becomes an internal thing which keeps going. And so that's the running, like a hamster wheel kind of going, an engine kind of on the inside. The perspective when it comes to, say, veterans or families of veterans, I've seen both ways that you're talking about, a great acceptance of this. This is my choice. I serve my country. I feel, proud to, it's part of my experience and I embrace it. And I've also seen very traumatized vets that have then decided that it was not worth it. It wasn't okay, and they aren't okay. And I think that has to do with the how deep that engine is running within you. Sometimes it is dependent, I guess, on a personality and what somebody feels about it, how they feel about their service or how they feel about their family member's service. It can be entirely appropriate for them to say, we're going to keep going and we're going to find great things. One of the things about learning how to survive is that you learn how to survive. And so that can be something really great about it. One of the downsides, I guess, or an alternate perspective is if you learn how to survive, you learn how to survive, but you don't always learn how to thrive. And, it really, it's a multiple perspective when we talk about things like this, which are really emotionally charged and have deep impact on people. Because while I would say I don't agree with the military anymore, I can say I used to, and I gave my life to it, and I wouldn't want to tell somebody, well, since I don't agree with it, you shouldn't either. It's, it's really where they put their heart and how they explain things. But it is not always so pretty. We just don't always see how somebody can be, messed up from those experiences and shut down, except that the agenda or their, rule following remains, and that is the way that they make sense of their experiences, the way they can keep surviving. It's double-edged. It goes both ways.
When a vet returns from a really bad situation, comes back from a tour in Afghanistan or what have you, and somebody that's really experienced, been a part of something really bad, when these vets come back and it's changed their life, these people come back and it's changed their life, is the military there to help, or are they there to stifle? That was kind of a question I had for you, and that, do they go, yeah, Renee, I know it was bad and you saw some bad things, but that's just how it is, or do they get you the, I guess for them to say, ooh, it was really bad, let's get you some help, kind of, I would assume that even while you're in, while you're there, and while you go out, they still want to keep you kind of in that arena, and I would assume that that's got to be very difficult, especially for somebody who gets out and has saw some terrible things, experienced some terrible things that have changed their life. And does it come down as plain and simple as, tough up, soldier, or, keep your mouth shut? Or what's your thoughts on that, if you don't mind?
My thoughts on that is that it depends on who in the military you talk to. This is the same as, pointing at government and feeling like we can get a solid answer.
Right.
It's more complicated. So while the military as an institution can have kind of a single voice through the spokesperson or through generally accepted beliefs, people are still complicated. Mm-hmm. And so, experiences vary. And so you can have, say, two vets and they've seen the same thing and they have legitimately different experiences, but because they've come back, say, there's no question about whether or not they are traumatized and need help. So that is the same. And then they can come back to a therapist or, some kind of help and support that guides a person through trauma while still, maintaining, but this is your place if you choose, and thereby, validating and helping as much as possible in legitimate healing. Or they can come back and have a therapist that is completely invalidating and says, you need to be strong. And so these are based on the individuals.
Right.
And so while we can have an overarching view, a sort of bird's eye view of how something is permeating as the military goes, then when it gets down to individuals, this is where I think things get really difficult and complicated, and we have conversations like this because people are sure of their experiences and they're different, but the problem is the mouthpiece is one, and that is so the military as an institution can keep functioning in the way that it does. Govern a body or allow, these groups of people, train them to do this specific thing, and then it really just depends on who you talk to of what the intent is behind that. And it depends on the person's own take on it. So I spent some time in Berlin when I was a child, and I grew up in a house that had a hiding space. And I have pieces of Berlin Wall in my house, and I learned about the Holocaust from the Germans and have a very different perspective on the United States role in the Second World War and the Germans' view on the Holocaust and even some of the Jewish view of that time. And they don't quite line up. So there's,
Really?
Because those perspectives are very different. And that caused me, I was a child, so I didn't really, think about, I mostly thought, how could this be? But I was also a kid, so I didn't think about it too much. Later on, my sense of identity seemed more cosmopolitan or international than your average military person, but I couldn't really pinpoint why until I decided to go deep into that. And I think that is a task that is, I don't want to say discouraged, but it's certainly not encouraged by something as institutional as the military mindset. And if we can consider the mindset as being internalized, then we won't go there. Because we're in a war here. Right. And so it just complicates something that is supposed to be simple and is sometimes just easier to live in a paradigm that we can understand. Of course, critical thinking has never been easy, We don't want to challenge our beliefs. It's very uncomfortable because then we have to literally reform our identities, and that is serious business.
It's got to be tough. From a young age, you were immersed in this pretty deeply.
Yes.
Oh, a very worldly person you are.
Well, perhaps, it depends on who you speak to. Comparatively here, yeah, perhaps.
Yeah. No, but I mean, really, to be exposed to that at a young age, very interesting. You obviously have I can just tell by the way you talk, you have a very different, in a good way, I say this, a very different view on life.
I would say so. Yeah.
Which we'll get into some of the things that you do and some of the things that you offer. I think that it's going to, I can see the value there without a doubt. You can definitely take a neutral, been on both sides of the table, both sides of the wall type of thing. With the military, again, like I said, the word brainwashing is bad, but I just think that movie I really enjoy is A Few Good Men. Jack Nicholson talking about his little speech, and I would tend to believe that maybe that is more true than we think. That things do go on. People don't need to know about everything that goes on. Things have to happen to keep people safe, and the people will do their jobs and do what they need to do, and maybe ethical. I guess if you look at a Marine's ethics and a guy you find in a business suit on the street, ethics are going to be two totally different things.
Yes, I would agree. I would say instill this, something like the military would instill a sense of what is safe as the generator, the engine, and everything that comes out of that is going to reflect a core value. So can we say that there are evil people in that movie? If you think about the core value and what, trying to do the right thing, it's not so easy to, and that's what I'm talking about. Trying to point to one person. Oh yeah, I'd so love to demonize Jack Nicholson when he says you can't handle the truth, but he honestly believes in what he's saying. And so if he were my client, then I would need to understand that and not, that's where being comfortable challenging my own beliefs becomes helpful and useful to my clients, because they need to see their voices heard, I think. And me as a medium, and I'm going to be feeling or getting a sense of who they are. And if I'm not comfortable challenging myself in what is real and what is right, and then things, they are complicated. People are complicated. Value systems are complicated. And that's, I would say, I tend to keep deciding that. To say it absolutely simplifies it, but I would say I tend to agree that things are more complicated than that. And we can see those two young soldiers in that movie really wrestling with what is right, because they were trying to do what is right. And in the end, they had, judicial punishments and just could not figure out how that could be, when you could just see everybody's trying to do the right thing. So it's an extremely thought-provoking movie, and I would say very much applicable to experiences in the military.
Interesting. You've come across a few of the Jack Nicholson types over the years?
Yeah, I'd say so, and I've also been that. So wholeheartedly agreeing with I love my country. I'm doing the right thing. And, again, I was a daughter and a wife. The role is different, but it's still just as much invested in that kind of system. And so how could I feel good about myself by wondering? It was too big a question to face. How could I make sense of my life, and how could I call myself a good person if I was not sure of the rightness of what I was doing because of the implications and the weight that, carried with it?
Heaven's psychic abilities had to obviously throw a lot more complication into the mix.
There's no way I can agree with you more.
I would, from someone again who was ingrained with yes, no, black, white, on, off, left, right, and then to throw that floating around on top had to, and I would assume still has to be, while you can draw knowledge and energy and helping people from that had to be really a tough one.
Yes, I'd say life is difficult, and it takes a lot of I have to constantly check myself. I call it, understanding my baseline, my physical, my emotional, my mental baseline. Who am I? It's evolving. I understand that it's evolving. If I can get down to the bare bones of it, how do I process things? How do I understand things? That tends to help. That's where philosophy really becomes helpful, because not only do I learn how to do that, I also have to articulate it, write a paper, make an argument, right? So that really has helped train me to understanding how to manage intuitive abilities and help other people at the same time in a way that tends to be a little different than, say, most mediums in my field.
Everybody, welcome back to Fringe Radio for the 3rd of October. Our guest tonight is Renee. Lindsey, again, Renee, thank you so much for coming up here, giving us your time tonight, and talking about these subjects. Very, very interesting.
Thank you for having me.
So, as I mentioned again a little earlier, being in that black and white world, left and right, on and off type of thing, is, you know, again, I could use the word brainwashing, training experiences, stuff like that. And then being having the psychic abilities, and then being a Mormon, a member of the church. And I don't say anything bad about this. I don't want people to take the wrong opinion. You know, I mean, I believe that religion, it does a lot of people a lot of good. It helps them out. Whatever your faith is, whatever steers you, whatever helps you, I think that's a good thing. But the little bit I do know about as a Chicago Catholic, the little bit I know about the LDS faith is that, again, there's a lot of time and devotion, and people put a lot of time and devotion in, and a lot of direction by the church and the church members. So now throw that into all this with religious beliefs and moral and immoral beliefs and right and wrong and psychic abilities, and man, there would be a lot of pills taken if you I should say that, but I mean, some people, that would be for the the average individual, that's just a lot to swallow. That's a lot there. There's a lot there.
I think it could have been. I was raised by parents who believed in asking questions of church. Mm-hmm. They didn't believe it to be a threat to faith to question. And so like I said, transitioning out of Mormonism was much easier on me than transitioning out of the military. And I remember talking to my mom about this a couple of months ago, and she said, I think it's really interesting that we taught you guys how to question religion, but didn't really ever think about questioning your culture of the military. And so it wasn't, I can relate to somebody feeling fully invested in religion, a religion such as Mormonism, because of my experiences in the military, but I don't actually draw the same parallel of, yes, I was Mormon and this is how it influenced me, because I grew up questioning and feeling like it was okay and more comfortable with my beliefs. I do have some, I one thing that influenced me that wasn't questioned much, I don't think, was the issue of sexuality in Mormonism. And coming from a childhood sexual abuse background, that was a heavy influence, where I thought that I couldn't make sense of my experience because I wasn't allowed to think about sexuality. And if we're going to come to, an awareness, a psychic awareness, sexual energy is very potent, it's very strong, it's very instinctive, it's difficult to explain, it's very confusing, and the strength of it, people's vibes, quote unquote, can get confused and muddled and entangled, and it becomes almost a where do I end and where do they begin sort of issue. And so that, fully removed from something like the military or religion, in and of itself becomes very difficult to manage and sort of sort through. In my experience, the only way for me to successfully, or feel like I'm sorting through it successfully, is to have a very clear idea of who I am and what my particular energetic flavor is. And that, sometimes we're around people who have similar flavors and it becomes more difficult, and sometimes we're around people that we don't really connect with at all, and it's not difficult to see a difference. But that was one thing. When I transitioned out of Mormonism, the question of sexuality and sexual expression became, for a while, forefront in my mind. So that is something I can relate to also, and I've done some academic work on it and thought about it quite a bit.
Helping people that are confused about their sexuality?
Not necessarily confused about their sexuality, more like approaching sexual experience is not inherently wrong. So just going all the way back to the beginning of what it means to express oneself sexually at all. So confusion about one's sexuality could be an ancillary question to that, you know, but at the core of it was, well, can I even go there? Can I even ask about that? And that's one of the things that I did ask about and didn't. It's sort of an ongoing thing. I mean, back in 2012, I think I really started asking those questions when I transitioned out of church. But the transition out of the military was happening before, and I wasn't trying to take on more, I think, than I can handle. Although I can tell you for sure I had a full-blown identity crisis when I moved out here and was no longer military or married. And who was I then? But after that started to settle down and crystallize, where I became more comfortable figuring out that process, then I could allow for this other issue and other issues that come along, you know, after
Sure.
I kind of have an idea of who I have a very solid idea of who I am. Now other questions can come around and I can help other people.
You've got to go down the road yourself first, though,
I think so.
to be able to help people.
Yes, I think now this is where I think what I offer in my experience and critical thinking, I'd like to tell people that it is my training and my experience augmented by my sensitivity is what helps people and not the other way around. So if I can get into somebody's energy and I can explain it to them, that's great. But if I don't really know what it is, it's kind of like I'm a mad scientist just sort of dissecting a person and giving it to them. And then I don't have the sort of empathy that I might have through living through an experience. Now, of course, the question becomes then, well, how can you even have the same experience as somebody, even if you have extreme empathy or an ability to see what they're seeing? How can these different experiences blend? And I like to bring it down to core emotions. Okay, I have, you know, one time I had a friend years ago who was talking about the death of his father and how hard it felt to lose a loved one, which I can personally relate to. But
Me too.
a friend, you know, his family member said, you'll never know what that's like. And I think that's right and also not right. I'll never know the exact experience, but the core emotions that it bring up losing a loved one can be shared. It's just a matter of getting to the point where we can connect in that way and feel like, you know, I think this family member said, what, did you lose your dog or something? Which to somebody who's been very attached to their pet would have huge weight. So it, you know, it becomes complex.
For sure. Questioning religion, you know, you brought up something, and I don't know if you're starting to notice this, but kind of with the program, what we talk about, you know, I've been doing this for 7 years. It's going to go into 6 years, 7 years. We have a lot of people that come on and we talk about, you know, all kinds of different things: paranormal, ufology, flying saucers, all kinds of things. And I'm not an expert. I kind of consider myself a researcher. I like to kind of get everybody's opinion on things. But religion is something that really, over the past, I'd say, year or two especially, people are starting to question things more and more. I know as a child, me growing up, I grew up as in an Irish Catholic family, well, an Italian Catholic family. And, you know, we went to church every Sunday, and this is what you believed in, and this is just how it was, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. I think that has gotten a lot of religions and religious leaders in a lot of trouble. Catholic Church has had plenty of problems with priests and bishops playing around with little kids. I mean, it's just how it is. It's human nature, right or wrong. But we were taught, I think again, kind of like the military thing, as you mentioned, Renee, kind of just ingrained in us so deeply. And now people, and I think especially as we get older in life, we start questioning things and say, well, you know, yeah, grandmother and grandpa and great-grandma and great-grandpa said this, this, and this, and mom and dad said this, this, and this. And I believed that for a while, and I taught my kids that, but I don't know if that's really the truth anymore. And I don't really, you know, all I've done is taken the hearsay from somebody else. And yeah, I went to that building on Sunday, and yeah, I read that book, and yeah, I agreed with everything they said. But I think more and more people are starting to be more open about things now. And they're starting to question things, starting to question creation, starting to question the afterlife, starting to question, I mean, you as a medium, not that many years ago, and I'm sure being a military person, to bring something like that up, probably they think you're crazy and they'd lock you up. Not that many years ago, you know, you talked about seeing something in the air, they'd lock you up. Even today, an airline pilot won't talk about a UFO, and plenty of them see them all the time. But I think our culture is slowly starting to change. Are you seeing that?
Oh, yeah. And I'll just note that when I was having visions and things when I first moved to Utah, I thought I was crazy. Certifiably crazy. It was not, oh, okay, that happened. And it was I'm totally fine with it. I went through the process of understanding how I could know something or how I could feel something and how it could be real, but not something I could explain. And in the end, I feel like it was not something I could explain right away. I do think that they don't have to be separate. Intuition and critical thinking are kind of like the right and the wrong, or the black and the white, science and religion, or science and faith, things like that. I think that there's a merging happening that we can see in the presentation of scientific studies, in the way that religion evolves socially. And I think it's a global phenomenon, personally, that there's a coming together of this dichotomy. And that is reflected, I think, in the way that people are questioning. Now, to take a metaphysical perspective and sort of bracket all of the ways we could look at it from a rational point of view, I'd say the planet is evolving. Mm-hmm. And so evolving brings up conversations like the world is changing, or it's coming to an end, and what does that mean, and things like that.
Well, we're going to talk about that.
Yeah,
in the next hour,
I'm happy to. This is, the world is changing. I think probably everybody can, think about it and agree with it in some way. I think two things are happening. The change comes maybe very relieving and comfortable for mm-hmm. some. They're just really happy that things are changing, and for others, there is a great constriction. Let's hold a tradition, and this is the way it's always worked, and let's just do it this way. But I would also submit that every one of us has those two opposing forces in us somewhere. So then we can be really open and free to these great beliefs as we're ready to change them, but there are other parts of us that are very resistant to that.
Right.
And is it wrong? I don't think so. Personally, I don't think so. I don't think it's very easy to assign value judgments to perspective. Certainly value judgments to whether something is legal or not, things like that. What do we do with how we're feeling? But as the medium perspective, the energy on the planet is shifting, I would say.
And it's interesting that we talk about, like, let's just use the term God in the military. I mean, when we hear our president, which I'm not going to go into politics, but whether you like or you don't like, I still respect the position, and I think people should. Always, God bless America, God bless America. So that religious overtone is always there. Was that in the military when you were with what you were doing, being in the military? Was that there too?
Oh, sure.
We're fighting for our country, and left or right, white or black, yes or no, and God.
Oh, yeah, that was greatly reflected in my studies of the Book of Mormon, which has great war history in it, and who won and why, and who lost and why, and this interplay between warring cultures. And so that, God on our side, that was part of it. That was certainly part of how I felt. I felt morally right, and that God was on my side, and that's why I could feel okay doing this or that. But like I said before, the examination of that didn't come until later. I didn't feel comfortable examining it because the implications were so huge. What does it mean to be a good person? I can't even imagine that maybe if I disagree with the heavenly sanction of my actions and beliefs, does that mean I'm a bad person? It just gets complicated.
It's complicated for everybody.
Yes, I think that that's true. But it isn't always easy to point a gun at somebody
right.
and pull the trigger right. and say, this is complicated.
Right.
You're just going to lose your mind. And there are plenty of those in military culture, vets and the like, that do have extreme difficulty managing their experiences.
Well, yeah, out of the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not kill.
Right.
But when you're in another country where there are bad people doing bad things, and you need to neutralize that problem, that's That's a tough one. That's and that's like warfare on your own mind. I mean, that's tough. That's a tough place to go.
Right. So we can say, well, I was following orders. I'm a good person.
Right.
I mean, there is, with a permeating system of control, there is always a reason that will back up the choice that you have internalized, and then maybe you're questioning. There's always going to be an answer for it.
Versus the guy that goes into the convenience store because he's out of work and his kids are hungry, and he points a gun at somebody's chest and they won't give him the money out of the register, and he pulls the trigger and he kills him. And again, some people would say, well, it was sound reasoning. Yeah, maybe, because others are going to say, well, he could have gone to the food bank. He or she could have done this. But again, that's a complex thing when you look at military, when you look at government as far as the CIA. I mean, let's call it the way it is. People are killed for different reasons all the time. Hopefully, they're neutralized because of something they could potentially do to inflict pain on others or other people. But could it be for money? Could it be for whatever? I don't know. That's there's a lot of balls in the air there.
Yeah, and is death necessary?
Right.
Yeah, it's as many questions as we have, I think we'll have as many answers as the people that we ask them to.
And everyone's going to have a different answer, a different perspective.
I think so. So this is a great question in philosophy. What is right? What's right living?
Right.
And I tend to agree with Simone de Beauvoir, who says that ethics are ambiguous, meaning they have all kinds of different, it's not just I'm going to behave this way around this person and that way around that person. It's more like I'm going to behave this way around this person in this given situation with these factors. But it's a constant evaluation of what is right, a fluid thing. So that makes it difficult.
It does.